This week has seen an unprecedented number of airstrikes launched by Russian forces into Ukraine. Today's wave of missile attacks killed at least 4 people, injuring many more. The strikes were directed mainly against the country's energy facilities. And Ukraine's President Zelensky, he says that Moscow continues to deliberately target civilian sites, knowing that winter is coming.
Surveying the damage from another deadly attack on Ukrainian homes. Emergency teams comb the wreckage and pick up the pieces. This time, it's bodies being recovered from the rubble. Neighbours say the blast hit as many would have been sleeping.
I heard the strike around 3 a.m. I heard 3 explosions. I realized it was somewhere nearby, but then nothing else. Then, in the morning, I found out that it had happened in this area.
3 families used to live in these homes, but Zaporizhia has been pummeled by Russian attacks in recent months, and locals don't know who was home during the latest blast.
It's the second time the city was hit. How are we surviving? There's nothing else left to do. Here is the way we are surviving, living our lives.
The devastation here is the result of another barrage of Russian missiles battering Ukraine, explosions injuring people in Dnipro, Kyiv and Odesa.
Another Russian terrorist attack has just occurred. This morning, dozens of missiles. Civilian sites are the main target. Russia is waging war on electricity and heat for people by blowing up power plants and other energy facilities.
Russia confirming that its defence force hit targets in the Dnipro and Zaporizhia regions, but Ukrainian civilians continue to fall victim to the attacks, which show no sign of easing as the war nears its 10th month.
And for more now, I'm joined by Mr. Robert Person. He's a professor of international relations at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And our correspondent, Nick Connolly, he is standing by for us in southern Ukraine. To both of you gentlemen, it's good to have you with us. Nick, let me just start with you. I'd like to talk about the airstrikes across Ukraine this week. But first, President Zelensky and the missile that hit inside Poland on Tuesday. NATO says that it was a Ukrainian air defense rocket and said that it was an accident. But President Zelensky insisted that it had to be a Russian rocket. Has his position, has it changed in the last 24, 36 hours?
Well, it definitely seems like he's dug himself into a hole there. He basically came out pretty early saying that the Ukrainian commanders who were responsible for the anti-aircraft, anti-missile systems, that they had told him that this was not a Ukrainian missile and that he had no reason not to believe them. He did then go on and say, if it turns out to be a Ukrainian rocket, then obviously Ukraine will apologise, especially given that this hit Poland. Poland currently is Ukraine's most important neighbour, the country that has taken the most Ukrainian refugees, the country that is crucial to getting Western weapons to Ukraine, that Ukraine is dependent on for all kinds of things. So this is obviously a very, very uncomfortable situation if it does turn out to be a Ukrainian rocket. There are lots of versions kind of still swirling around here in Ukraine that there might have been a Russian rocket hitting a target very close to the border as a kind of provocation on purpose to try and provoke the Ukrainians into kind of firing missiles in that direction. Very little clarity, very little in kind of the way of more concise explanations so far, but definitely a sense that, yeah, Zelensky has got himself in a difficult position and now is looking for ways out.
Professor Person, let me ask you, can we glean anything from what happened in Tuesday's incident militarily? I mean, are Western weapons, these air defense systems that have been sent to Ukraine, they appear to be working now, don't they? I mean, and that is part of the goal, isn't it?
Yes, they certainly do appear to be having the intended effect. It's interesting to note that if the missile itself was fired from Ukraine, a Ukrainian air defense system, that is a Russian-made system that Ukraine would have inherited from the Soviet era. And so I think elsewhere we've seen evidence that suggests that Western-provided anti-aircraft missiles have been very effective, and really just reinforcing the point that, frankly, now what the international coalition in support of Ukraine needs to do, regardless of this position that Mr. Zelensky seems to have sort of backed himself into, needs to be prepared to increase its further provision of these defensive weapons. Let's not forget that this never would have happened, this accident, if Russia wasn't dangerously firing missiles so close to the Polish border.
Yeah, it's a good point. And the head of NATO said that ultimately Russia was responsible for what happened on Tuesday. Nick, the incident on Tuesday, it basically stole the attention for at least for a day or so from what was the largest airstrike against Ukraine since the invasion began 9 months ago. Talk to me about what Ukrainians have been coping with this week.
Well, it's true, and I think even the best Western-provided systems, of which there's still, barely enough to cover a territory as big as Ukraine's, and after all, this war is being fought not only along the 1,000-kilometer front line, but also across the whole country, from Donetsk to Lviv on the Polish border there. So basically, Russia just overwhelming the capacity of Ukraine to knock these rockets out the sky, even if, in the case of the NASAM systems that have just come from the US, we're hearing from the Ukrainian military they're claiming 100% effectiveness, that every NASAMS rocket fired hit something out of the sky. But definitely the outages are getting longer.
Oh, yeah, it looks like we've lost Nick's signal for just a second. We're going to try to get him back. Let me go, though, to you, Professor Person. And I want to pick up on something that has been said this week. A top U.S. military general was quoted as saying that this war in Ukraine will not end soon, and its end will not include Russia withdrawing completely from eastern Ukraine. I mean, those are some strong words to swallow if you're inside Ukraine. Was this a needed reality check, or do you think that these were words that would have been better left unspoken?
So here I should probably point out that these are my personal views, not the official position of the United States government or Department of Defense. But I would disagree with that general insofar as it's clear that Ukraine will continue fighting, and they will continue to fight hard for the liberation of their entire homeland, and of that I have no doubt. Now, the current trend in the conflict certainly appears to be on Ukraine's side. They have the capabilities, they have the will, and have proven to be the superior fighting force. And so I think, again, as long as they are able to make it through this winter, and withstand, these essentially war crimes, these attacks against civilians that Russia is perpetrating. And as long as they're continued to be supplied with the weaponry to do that, they will keep on the fight and they will keep on winning. Ultimately, Putin will not stop fighting this war either until he is pushed out of Ukraine or until he secures his original political objective, which is to overthrow the government in Kyiv. I think he clearly will fail on that second, and so we can only hope that Ukraine succeeds in their mission.
And Nick, let me just ask you, we've got the sound back with you now. I mean, has there been reaction in Ukraine? I'm sure that these comments did not sit well there in Kyiv, especially with President Zelensky.
I also had some trouble hearing you there, but basically I think I understand what you're talking about talks being suggested as the kind of immediate goal, Kyiv being put under pressure to kind of, wind this down and give Russia some kind of deal that it's obviously looking for and that it obviously needs as a breather to kind of resupply. There's definitely no appetite for that here. Either amongst politicians or amongst ordinary people, everyone you talk to will tell you we tried that in 2014 when we had Minsk 2, and the Russians still came back for more territory. There is a sense here that Russia is still hell-bent on destroying Ukrainian independence. Lots of Russian leaders see Ukrainian independence and statehood as a misunderstanding of history, and right now giving them a chance to rearm and to train up more soldiers would just make it that much harder for Ukraine to protect itself next time round.
And Nick, let me just ask you before we run out of time. There was a comment made earlier this week by a top U.S. general who said that the war in Ukraine will end later rather than sooner, and that it would be unrealistic to expect Russia to withdraw completely from Ukrainian territory. Has there been reaction from Zelensky?
I haven't heard anything specific as to that. I think there is definitely a big fear about directly, getting involved in kind of internal American, debate on this and kind of contradicting the very people who are supplying Ukraine with weapons right now. But just to give you one kind of bit of detail there, I'm getting contacts in Crimea telling me that Russian people who've moved to Crimea since 2014 are selling up their houses, selling up their property en masse. So there's definitely an expectation there, even amongst people, who in theory, have for now no reason to fear that the Ukrainian army is about to arrive in Crimea. There is a sense there that there is no future for them, even in Crimea, that Russia has held since 2014.
Okay, and let me just last point then goes to you, Professor Person. When you hear that, is it possible then to think that this war will end not just with the Russians withdrawing from eastern Ukraine, from the Donbass, but also that the illegal annexation of Crimea from 2014, that can also be undone by this war being ended?
I think it's entirely possible. It's certainly Ukraine's objective to restore its complete sovereignty over its territory, to include reclamation of Crimea. And so I think it's certainly within the realm of possibilities. The wild card, of course, is how would Russia react to a serious Ukrainian offensive that threatens to retake Crimea? We saw that Putin basically stood down from his threats and his bluffs when they gave up Kherson. But the question is, would he be so willing to give up Crimea as easily? And that's uncertain.
Professor Robert Person from West Point and our very own correspondent Nick Connolly in southern Ukraine. To both of you gentlemen, we appreciate your time, your reporting, and your insights tonight. Thank you.